Hi guys, it's Eclipsing. Today I've got a speed paint in the background and I'm going to talk a bit about some of the basic steps I do for my art with this drawing as a guide. I feel like I kind of talked about my process a bit in some of my live streams and on the on-video descriptions I add to some of my speed paints, but I got you. I think that having a specific video capturing some of these ideas all in one is a good one to have. This isn't exactly a full tutorial step by step or focused on one skill detail. I'm really sorry about that. I know some of you have asked forever for an eye or a face tutorial. I know I'm a doo-doo head when it comes to making videos. Instead, for this video, I don't exactly talk about every little thing. I assume some level of knowledge or perhaps it's something I could fill in the future, but this video is meant to highlight the overall process and some pointers on specific things that showed up for this painting. Think of it as a starting point on an insight to how I draw rather than a very focused approach on one part. I think having a big picture is important before doing a deep dive. So I hope this video can still help some of you in your art journey, even though I'm no professional and I make a lot of mistakes too, but I want to share what I can share. So let's begin. This is like step 0, some basic info on the tools and settings I use. I favor, as you might tell from my channel videos, I like to use Clip Studio Paint and I typically rely on the default brushes that come with the program. I think custom brushes can come really handy and bring out that extra texture and pizzazz to a painting, or it could really help you achieve certain parts of a painting that would take forever by hand. But I'm kind of lazy about finding or making brushes, and this also inadvertently makes it easier for you guys to follow along, by chance. So that's that. Just a little preface about it. For a digital canvas, I use at least A5 canvas size at 300 dpi resolution, which is good for prints. Even though I don't really make prints, this just gives me some chance of having it be printed if I ever decide to make prints in the future, or just for my personal reasons. But mostly these would work nice as well for background wallpapers as well. So that's good. Sometimes I alter to an even larger canvas size, for example for certain commissions as requested, but it really depends. I'm not too big on like figuring out canvas kind of stuff, but that's what I use. So starting off, I started with a picture of a pencil sketch from my sketchbook, and I removed all the background gray tones by selecting it and deleting all of it, so that I could keep just the black lines as a starting point. This isn't a very typical thing for me to do. I actually tend to draw the lines digitally first, like everything is all digital, including the sketch, but I had this lying around and I want to make a digital drawing from it. So I don't like working with white in the background too, as you may have noticed. To me, it's just too bright and it's too difficult to see colors against it, so I use a darker or neutral tone. Usually that'll be gray or like a light tan or something like that. In this one, I opted for a dark green because it's what the main background color will end up as, so I can get a feel for how the characters look against it. Then I lay down the basic fills that the character will have, so I'm putting it underneath the sketch layer. I put white for the wolf spirit and peaches and brown for San, the girl character. I don't do too much shading because I'll likely overpaint it later, but I sometimes put preliminary shading for cheeks, under the chin, and other places that likely will have shadow. The big thing I do from here on out is just merge my sketch in undercolors. Like, I steamroll that baby into one big pancake, and I mostly work on this one layer from now on, for the main subjects at least. I've expressed many times that I don't like to use a lot of layers. Instead, I like to have layers for the background, the midground, and the foreground, and then also for small accessories and lighting and all these color effects. Oh man, do I love to play around with those. One of the reasons I work with minimal layers is that I like the pure blending effect that some of these brushes give you. I don't do cell shading kind of style, and when it comes to a painting style, you really rely on having like blends here and sharp color changes there, and sometimes brush texturing. If I make a separate layer for adding some colors for shading, I get this super defined edges and I can't really blend it the way that I want it to with the lower layer. Instead, the best I can do is do some sort of blending that thins out the one on top, which is more of an opacity thing and less like a blend of certain colors and how they mix that I really want from a brush. So with my stuff as one layer, or one main layer, I start cleaning up edges and putting in shades. I add the rosy cheeks, the shadows, all of that. I also start putting in any other colors that help for the overall composition. I can't really describe how I pick colors for the overall piece. I tried to describe it a little in one of my other videos where I talk a little bit about like art stuff. But basically I try various colors in my head or on the canvas as a test, and a lot of times I make sure the main subject has some sort of contrast with the surroundings so that they are easily defined and they draw the viewer's attention. One thing I could suggest if you aren't sure how to pick colors is to find color palettes to use or as a starting point to inspire you on picking colors. Pro tip: color selection. Picking colors takes practice and a sense of atmosphere and composition. I can't go into depth on color picking and theory, but one thing I see some beginner artists do is choosing a shade color that is more a blackened version of the base color. While this works, sometimes it results in a sort of muddy look to the drawing, very dull. I don't know, it's hard to describe. Obviously, color is influenced by a lot of things, like the source of the light, the reflection from nearby objects, or even just artistic interpretation to purposely invoke certain moods even if the coloring isn't super realistic. Even if you don't take realistic lighting into consideration, I think having a more varied choice of shading color can really bring your art to life and give it a more bright, lively appearance. I like to choose a slight adjacent color for shades. For example, with a yellow object, I might choose a more orangey shade for warmth, or maybe a pale, more coolish purplish color for other cases. For pink, I might shade with red or magenta, sometimes even blue to be more creative. And you can see that as I'm rendering the shapes of things, I am also changing things up whenever I see fit, such as the pose or where things are located. Part of the rendering includes putting in some basic shades and getting the shape of it to be defined and cleaner so that I can add further details as I render it further. In some drawings, I have the background sketched in already, but for this one, I did it afterwards. I want to get an idea of the background down before I start putting in details on the main subjects, so I started putting in shadows and I defined some tree trunks, some, tree leaves up above. This also includes some ideas in lighting. You could tell that I wanted some of the foliage that may or may not be in this picture to block the light, and so it casts some shadows and peaks of light on them. And later on I added a particularly intense ray of light shining through just for, dramatic effect, a little spotlight. I made some layers both above and under the layer with the girl and the wolf, since I also had some foliage on top that would block some of the subjects. So I needed that to be on top of them. With a basic plan in place, I went back to rendering more details, such as adding the texture of the fur that San is wearing. This was done with a series of short, dark strokes to make the shadows of the fur clumps, and then lighter ones on top for the actual fur itself. Honestly, a lot of these fur detail parts are just a lot of patience, same thing over and over again. I worked a bit on the hair as well, and some details in the leaves above. I think it would have been a good use of a leaf brush, but I went ahead and did everything leaf by leaf, by hand, manually. I felt like I couldn't blend in the usage of a brush really well with how I was drawing this, and I also didn't want to spend the time to find a brush while streaming and all that, so I just did it this way. Pro tip: using brushes. I want to reiterate that I have nothing against custom brush usage. I think it's a really good way to achieve a certain texture, or if the brush is of a certain asset, which I mentioned just now, it's a good way to save time and have a consistent result. However, if you do use shape brushes, I think you should make sure you can make it blend in with the rest of your art. When you look at a professional artist's art, you can often not really tell where the brushes are used that like make all those preset shapes, and everything looks like it belongs. Sometimes with the beginner's art, it's super obvious when they use a grass or leaves brush, for example. It just kind of sticks out. Sometimes it's because it doesn't fit the style of the art or it's overused. Just make sure if you want things to not look so jarring that the brush fits the rest of your art and your scene. And then I began the daunting task of putting in fur for the wolf spirit. Disclaimer, I don't really draw animals much. Someone who draws a lot of animals can surely have much better explanations, but this is my typical way of drawing fur. It's pretty much similar how I did the fur being worn by the girl, but instead it's thinner, longer, and more expressive. Like I've mentioned, this involved using both dark and light strokes to make the appearance of fur, but I make sure to follow the natural grain of that the hair would grow. So this means that the fur is growing outwards from the eyes, both above and under the eyeballs, away from the face. And then it naturally curves in layers of thick fur from the head and down the neck to the rest of the body. You also notice that hairs on the face are shorter, more finely drawn, like around the snout. Face is more delicate, while the body has much fuller, longer hair for warmth and protection. One fun thing I did that was that I added both very light golden strokes as well as silvery blue ones. I felt that this contrasting set of colors gives the wolf spirit a more ethereal, supernatural look, especially with the blue in there. The gold also helped to keep the wolf from getting too cool toned in the overall picture. It kind of balances out a little bit. If you've never seen Princess Mononoke, you might think that the face of the wolf spirit looks really unsettling, but I assure you that is literally how it looks. It just has this weird smug looking face with a giant mouth, and it was just such a wild time drawing it because it just looks weird, but you know, that's how it is. I spent some time refining the background a little bit, but not too much since it's not the focus of the drawing. I added just some vague shapes back there. I kind of mentioned this in a previous video, but you don't always have to draw everything super crisp and detailed if it's like in the background or something. I also added the Kodama forest spirits, even though I decided to make them a bit more of a glowy, transparent look instead of their appearance in the film, which is more white and opaque. When it comes to drawing things that radiate light, I add a layer on top of the subject and use a glow overlay effect at a lower lower opacity to give it that extra ring of light around it. Afterwards, I added more highlights in bits of the wolf and girl here and there. I also added in the wolf children that kind of framed the piece, since I felt like it looked a little empty in the corners and it wouldn't require too much more effort to add them in. The techniques to draw them are pretty much the same as the big wolf spirit. I also changed the aspect ratio near the end of the drawing, since I felt like the longer view, longer horizontally view, looked a bit more pleasing and film-like. So I wanted that feel. There are certain parts in the process in which I may use the transform tool to resize, reshape, or move certain elements of a drawing. It's definitely an advantage that digital art has over traditional. The ability to basically undo things is amazing. And don't be afraid also to flip your drawing horizontally to check for mistakes. I think that's a really useful tool to have. As humans, we get really used to looking at things in a certain angle, and I think flipping around, you can really tell that you might have certain leanings if your eyes are not trained to, or your hands or whatever, the way you draw. If you're not used to drawing certain things, especially, you can spot mistakes easier if you flip it. So in the final step, I may add some extra filters on top of everything to alter the overall coloring or tones of the drawing. This is usually some sort of low opacity overlay or pin light layer, or sometimes I adjust the piece with a tone curve. And finally in the end, I just export the drawing as a .png because JPEG is lossy and gross, and then I just upload it wherever. wherever it may be, or I just keep it on my computer and I just forget about it. And like that, most of my drawings are done more or less the same way. Portrait focused art will spend more time on rendering all the details in the face, background heavy art will spend more time on the environment, and doodles are just a somewhat fairly simplified process of what I just described, with missing steps and less care for everything. Like, I'm sorry, those are doodles. But yeah, I hope this video was somewhat helpful. I gave a big overview on the process, and that was a lot to get through, and I'm sorry I can't go into everything detailed, but maybe in the future I can have separate videos that focus on specific things, like faces, for example. I know that's a popular one. But yeah, thanks so much. If this was helpful or you liked it or whatever, give it a little thumbs up. Let me know that my efforts are not in vain. And if you're not subscribed, please subscribe if you do like my content. I will try to be posting videos. I know I'm not great at it, but you know, I tried. I try my best. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.